The rotors of the UH-60 Black Hawk carved through the Afghan night like a mechanical beast tearing the sky apart. The sound was deafening inside the cabin, metallic clatter mixed with the rhythm of soldiers' heartbeats. Every ranger aboard felt the tension that came with night missions. They were flying low over Kunar province, where the mountains swallowed even echoes, and every flicker of light could mean an ambush waiting below. Sergeant First Class Ava Landon sat near the open door, helmet locked, visor down, rifle across her lap. Her eyes, though hidden, never stopped scanning the terrain below. She was the team's point sniper, a precision specialist who had earned her reputation not by talking, but by surviving. What others didn't. She was one of the first female rangers assigned to a direct action squad. And though most respected her now, it hadn't always been that way. 2 minutes out, the crew chief yelled, voice fighting the roar of the blades. The men checked weapons, tightened harnesses, gave nods to one another, the silent rituals before chaos. Ava, calm and controlled, double-checked her gear. Night vision optics, sidearm, ammo count. Everything in place. Her body was a storm of muscle memory. Every movement automatic after years of training. But outside, the sky was turning violent. Dark clouds gathered over the peaks, and sudden turbulence threw the Black Hawk off balance. The pilot's voice crackled through comms. Hold tight, we're hitting a crosswind. The bird jolted, banking sharply. The lights flickered, then dimmed to red. One of the rangers cursed. Another grabbed a strap overhead. Ava felt her boots slip slightly against the floor as gravity yanked them sideways. Then it happened. A streak of tracer fire erupted from the ridge below, orange sparks climbing into the dark. The enemy had spotted them. Contact. Left ridge. Someone shouted. Bullets tore through the air, pinging off the helicopter's metal skin. The crew chief leaned out the open door, returning fire with the mounted M240. Brass casings rained like sparks onto Ava's shoulder. She shifted to help, eyes cutting through the dark. The tracer line was too close to organized. This was a trap. The pilot screamed over comms, "We're hit, losing lift." The Black Hawk lurched violently. Ava grabbed the side handlebar, but the force ripped her hand free. She stumbled toward the open door, weightless for a terrifying second as the world tilted. "Landon, hold on," a ranger shouted, reaching for her. Their gloves brushed fingertips, grazing, but the tilt deepened, and momentum decided her fate. The next instant, Ava's body was yanked out of the bird by centrifugal force. She didn't scream. She didn't have time. One heartbeat she was inside, the next she was in freefall. The wind roared in her ears, the earth rising fast below. The stars spun above like shards of glass. For a fleeting moment, she saw her reflection in the night vision lens, tiny, human, fragile. Inside the chopper, the team froze. Man down. "We lost her." The pilot's voice broke. "She's gone, Landon's gone?" The Black Hawk fought for altitude, limping away from the kill zone, smoke trailing behind. The Rangers sat in silence, helmets bowed. Some whispered prayers, others cursed under their breath. No one wanted to say it out loud, but they all knew what a fall from that height meant. Except Ava Landon wasn't finished. She hit the ground hard. The impact slammed through her spine, the world exploding into white pain. Rolling instinctively, she tucked her chin and let her body follow the slope of the rocky hill. Stones cut her arms. Dust filled her lungs. When she finally stopped, she lay still, gasping. Her ears rang. Her chest heaved. For a long, brutal minute, she couldn't move. Then the ranger in her took over. Breathe. Assess. Move. She flexed her fingers, winced, but felt them respond. Her ribs burned, but none were broken badly enough to stop her. Her right shoulder screamed, possibly dislocated. But she was alive. Against every law of physics, she was breathing. God, she rasped. Still here. She blinked up at the night sky, saw the last flicker of the helicopter's running lights disappearing over the ridge. A smear of smoke cut across the stars. She wanted to call out, to tell them she was alive, but her radio was gone. Probably shattered in the fall. Her rifle had landed a few feet away, miraculously intact. She crawled to it, dragging herself through the dust. Far below, she could hear distant voices shouting in Pashto. The enemy. They'd seen her fall. They were coming to check for the body. Her breathing slowed. Every nerve screamed, but her training overrode the pain. She grabbed her weapon, chambered around, and looked toward the direction of the sounds. "All right," she whispered. "You want to find me? Let's make that mistake together." She rolled into the shadows of a rock formation, hiding her silhouette against the moonlight. When she peeked out, 2 flashlights were moving across the slope. They were close, too close. She steadied her rifle, exhaled slowly, and pulled the trigger. The first shot cracked through the valley. The first man dropped. The second panicked, shouting for backup, firing blindly into the darkness. Ava shifted positions, silent as a ghost, and fired again. Silence returned, broken only by the distant echo of rotor blades, fading somewhere far away. She crawled to the bodies, stripped a radio, a canteen, and a knife. Every ounce of pain screamed for rest, but she didn't stop. She needed cover, water, and elevation. By dawn, she had found a narrow cave tucked into the mountain face. There, she collapsed. She wrapped her arm with a strip of cloth, checked her rifle again, and tried not to think about the fall. Every breath burned, but her mind stayed sharp. She remembered the look on her teammates' faces before she felt shock, fear, helplessness. They thought she was gone. Maybe they'd already reported her here. Maybe command would send her parents the folded flag. Not yet. A faint smile crossed her cracked lips. "You'll see me again," she whispered to the dark. "You'll see me walk back." The wind howled through the cave mouth, carrying the scent of dust and metal. Somewhere out there, a squad of insurgents was already searching. They'd find the drop site, maybe the blood, maybe even her trail. But Ava Landon wasn't a ghost. She was a ranger. And rangers didn't die easy. Outside, the sky began to lighten gray, brushing against the black horizon. Her breathing slowed, exhaustion finally taking hold. For the first time since falling, she closed her eyes. Miles away, aboard a returning Black Hawk, her team sat in silence. The colonel's voice crackled through the radio. "Sergeant Landon is presumed lost." The men bowed their heads. But down in the valley, amid the rising light of a new dawn, a lone heartbeat continued. And somewhere, between death and duty, Sergeant Ava Landon made a silent promise to herself. If the mountain had spared her once, she'd make sure it never regretted it. Dust settled in a slow curtain over the rocks where Sergeant Ava Landon had fallen. Dawn crept up gray and uncertain, the first light catching the jagged outline of the Hindu Kush. She woke to the sting of grit on her tongue, and a silence so complete that it felt heavy. For a long moment she lay still, letting her senses come back one at a time, the throb behind her eyes, the taste of copper, the numbness in her fingers. Her body ached from neck to ankle. Every inhale sliced through bruised ribs. She rolled to one side, tested her legs, and hissed when pain flared through her hip. The dislocated shoulder was worse. The joint sat wrong beneath the fabric of her sleeve. But it would hold for now. She'd survived the fall, and that meant she was already winning. She scanned the slope. Her rucksack lay 20 yards downhill, half buried in shale. The rifle rested across a boulder, miraculously unbroken. Her radio smashed to shards. Ava dragged herself toward the pack, crawling on one elbow and her knees, moving slow to keep from sending stones clattering down the valley. Below, she could hear faint voices, enemy patrols, searching the area where she dropped from the sky. When she reached the pack, she tore it open. Inside, one half-full water bottle, a combat knife, and a flare she couldn't risk using. Her map was soaked in fuel from a ruptured cartridge, but she could still read the terrain lines. She located her position, roughly 8 kilometers southeast of the insertion point. The team would be miles away by now, maybe grounded at base. If they'd declared her KIA, no one was coming. She took a slow drink, forcing herself to ration. Then she looked at her shoulder, grimaced, and found a solution she hated. Wedging her boot against a rock, she pressed her back into the wall and jerked her arm forward. The pop was brutal, the pain so sharp it took her breath, but when it was over the joint, sat right again. She panted through clenched teeth, sweat freezing on her neck. "Still breathing," she muttered. "Still Ranger." The sun rose higher, throwing long shadows through the valley. Ava climbed to a ledge that offered cover and sightlines. Through her scope, she saw 3 insurgents picking through the crash zone. They were cautious, weapons raised, scanning for movement. One pointed to the blood trail she'd left on the stones. They started tracking. Ava set her rifle, steadied her breathing, and waited until the lead man stepped into a clearing. One shot, clean, he dropped. The others dove for cover, firing wildly toward the ridge. Ava rolled to a new position, fired twice more, and silence swallowed the canyon again. The echo of gunfire drifted away like smoke. When it was over, she didn't celebrate. She gathered her spent casings, wiped prints from the rocks, and moved uphill. The fall had taught her one thing: motion kept her alive. Stopping meant dying. Hours turned into a blur of pain and calculation. She traveled at a crawl through ravines and dry streambeds, using the terrain to mask her route. Each step tested her limits. Her boots were torn. Blood seeped through the fabric around her ankle. She pressed on anyway. The air was thin, the light harsh. By midday, she found shelter under a fractured overhang where a trickle of water ran down the stone. She filled her canteen, cleaned her wounds, and forced herself to eat the last of an energy bar that had survived the fall. That night, as the temperature dropped below freezing, Ava built a small fireless camp. She wrapped herself in the torn thermal liner of her pack and watched the stars blink into existence. Somewhere far above, aircraft moved tiny dots of light crossing the black. She wondered if any of them belonged to her unit. Wondered if the pilot who'd screamed her name still heard it in his head. Memories surfaced uninvited. Her first day at Ranger School, the sneers, the bets that she wouldn't last a week. The mud, the exhaustion, the nights when she'd slept standing because collapsing meant failure. Those trials had burned weakness out of her. This was just another test, only the stakes were higher. By morning, she was moving again. She used the rising sun to orient west, toward the extraction route her team had planned. The path wound through narrow passes, where sound carried for miles. Twice she froze as enemy convoys rolled by, their engines echoing between cliffs. She waited until the noise faded before continuing, keeping low, counting her steps in rhythm with her heartbeat. On the third day, she found the remnants of a U.S. reconnaissance drone scattered across a slope. The wreck was charred, but its battery pack was intact. She pried it loose and tucked it into her gear. Maybe, with luck, she could jury-rig a signal later. She smiled for the first time since the fall. "Thanks, Air Force," she whispered. The climb ahead was brutal loose shale, sheer drops, and wind that cut through her gear. But from the top, she'd have line of sight on the valley. She climbed anyway, using her rifle as a cane. When she finally reached the ridge, she collapsed, chest heaving. From here, the land stretched endless and empty, a mosaic of brown and gray. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay friendly territory. She pulled out the enemy radio she'd taken and fiddled with the dials. Static hissed. Foreign chatter spilled through, words she didn't fully understand, but the tone was enough. They were hunting her. American ghost, one voice said. She fell from sky. Ava chuckled under her breath. Let them think that. Fear was a weapon, too. As dusk fell, she found a small plateau with cover. She set her back to the rock, rifle across her knees. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but her mind stayed razor-sharp. She replayed the mission briefing in her head, the objective, the fallback routes, the timing. If her team had made it to the target village, they'd be exfiltrating in 2 days. That was her window. Survive 48 hours. Move west. Stay unseen. The wind picked up again, carrying with it a distant thud of rotor blades, maybe friendly, maybe not. She tilted her head, listening. For a heartbeat, hope surged. Then it faded. A sound drifted north, away from her. She pressed her lips together, refusing despair. She whispered into the night, half prayer, half promise. You threw me out. I'm walking home. The moon rose, painting silver across the stones. She stayed awake, scanning through her scope, every sense stretched thin. When the cold finally numbed her hands, she flexed them around the rifle, reminding herself she was still in control. Somewhere beyond that next ridge lay rescue, or a fight that would decide if anyone ever told her story. Either way, Sergeant Ava Landon was moving toward it. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was hunting her way back to the world that thought she'd died. And as the night swallowed the valley once more, the legend of the ranger who didn't need a parachute took its first real breath. The mountains didn't wake kindly. At dawn, frost glazed the rocks, and wind slid through the gullies like a whisper of knives. Sergeant Ava Landon crouched in the shadow of a ridge, breath fogging against her scarf. 3 days had passed since the fall. She had stopped counting Bruce's pain, was now part of the uniform. Her world had narrowed to essentials: water, ammunition, movement. Sleep came in fragments, 20-minute bursts when her nerves allowed it. Every time her eyes closed, the whir of helicopter blades returned, and she felt the drop again. But she always woke before the ground hit. Below her, the valley sprawled like a labyrinth of stone. Thin trails wound between villages half hidden beneath dust. She studied them through her scope, memorizing patrol routes. A convoy of pickup trucks rumbled along one pathfighter's armed and alert. Ava waited until they vanished behind a ridge, then began her descent. Moving alone was equal parts science and instinct. She kept to the shadows of boulders, crossed open ground at a sprint, and left no tracks in soft soil. Her gear clinked once. She froze, heart pounding, and adjusted the straps. Silence again. The smallest mistake could summon death from any direction. By midday, heat replaced the morning chill. Her throat ached with thirst, but she rationed each sip, knowing rescue was still far away. When she found a narrow stream trickling through a crack in the rocks, she knelt beside it, filled her canteen, and splashed water across her face. The reflection that stared back looked older, harder dust-caked skin, eyes like shards of steel. She barely recognized herself, but that didn't matter. Recognition didn't keep you alive. Readiness did. She followed the stream west until the sun dipped low. At one bend, she caught the distant shimmer of smoke-cooking fires. A village. Tempting, dangerous, necessary. She needed information, and maybe supplies. Waiting until night, She approached from the high side, using a goat path carved into the slope. The air smelled of spice, sweat, and diesel. Children's laughter drifted through thin walls. It felt impossibly normal for a place surrounded by war. Ava crouched behind a crumbling wall near the edge of the settlement, watching. Two men armed with rifles chatted beside a rusted truck. A radio played faint music. She listened for English words, none came. Her Arabic was passable. Her Pashto barely functional. Still, tone spoke louder than language. These weren't soldiers. They were smugglers, opportunists. That meant trade was possible, if she looked desperate enough, and if they didn't decide to sell her instead. She waited until one walked off toward a shed, then stepped out of the dark with her rifle slung low. The remaining man whirled, startled. "Don't," she said, palms raised. "No harm." She pointed to her canteen, then to the stream below. Water, food. He stared at her uniform, at the flag patch half torn on her sleeve. Recognition flickered, fear followed. He shouted something sharp and reached for his weapon. Ava reacted on reflex. A swift kick knocked it aside. A shove sent him sprawling. She didn't shoot. Instead, she sprinted back into the hills before the village could react, vanishing among the rocks as gunfire cracked behind her. When she stopped, lungs burning, she cursed softly. "Nice work, Landon." No food, no allies. But she'd confirmed something important. They knew an American was alive. That rumor would travel fast, drawing attention and maybe drawing her own people. She climbed higher that night, finding shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut half carved into the mountainside. Inside lay a pile of brittle straw and a rusted lantern. She lit no fire, but she did allow herself a few drops of warmth from an energy packet hidden in her vest. Outside, wolves howled. She loaded her rifle, set it across her knees, and let exhaustion drag her toward shallow sleep. Dreams came in fragments again, her squad's faces lit by red interior lights, the pilot's shout, the endless fall. When she jerked awake, dawn was just smearing the sky pale pink. A pair of vultures circled high above. "Not today," she muttered, standing. Her injuries stiffened overnight. She stretched them methodically, grimacing through the pain. A ranger didn't complain. She recalculated. Her route would take her across the northern ridge, toward a communications outpost the team had marked before insertion. If she could reach it, she might re-establish contact. The next 2 days blurred into survival mathematics. Measure distance by the sun's arc. Gauge safety by the silence between winds. She scavenged a few roots and a single energy bar from the pack. At night she listened to enemy radio chatter, learning their search patterns. They called her the Shadow Woman. It almost made her laugh. Late on the second night, rain swept across the mountain's cold needles, slicing through her fatigue. Lightning flashed, and for an instant she saw her reflection in a puddle again, soaked, shivering, but standing. The storm became her ally, masking her movement as she crossed open ground. Thunder hid the crunch of gravel under her boots. At dawn she crested the ridge and froze. Below lay a small encampment of insurgents, half a dozen tents, one antenna, and several armed guards. The comms relay she needed. Risk meant life. Hesitation meant death. She slid down the slope, staying low behind scrub and boulders, until she was close enough to hear voices. 2 guards smoked beside a generator. Ava waited until a gust of wind rose, then moved. 3 silent steps, 1 precise strike. Both men dropped before they could shout. She dragged the bodies behind the generator, took their radio, and powered the antenna console. Lights flickered weakly. She tuned to ranger frequencies, static crackling in her ear. "Command, this is Landon." "Repeat, this is Sergeant Ava Landon, 75th Ranger Regiment." Do you copy? Nothing. She tried again. Static. A surge of panic fluttered in her chest, but she forced it down. She switched channels, adjusted frequency. A faint voice broke through, unintelligible, but human. Then the signal died as power sputtered. The generator coughed smoke and went silent. She slammed her fist against the console, swallowed the frustration, and grabbed what supplies she could. A field map, spare batteries, and a handful of ration packs. When she turned to leave, headlights flared on the far side of camp. A truck returning early. She dove for cover as men spilled out, shouting. Gunfire erupted, rounds pinging off metal. Ava sprinted uphill through rain-slick rocks. Bullets chased sparks from stone. She zigzagged, dropped behind a boulder, returned 2 shots, and kept climbing. By the time she reached the crest, her lungs felt like fire. She didn't stop until the valley was a smear of darkness behind her. When silence finally returned, she collapsed beside a boulder, trembling with exhaustion. She tore open a ration pack and ate with shaking hands. The taste was like chalk, but it filled the emptiness. Her body hurt everywhere. Her mind, somehow, stayed calm. She'd failed to make contact, but she'd confirmed the route west. And she'd lived another day. As the rain eased, the sky cleared to a scatter of stars. She watched them, picking out Polaris to realign her direction. Somewhere beneath that same sky, her squad might be looking up too, wondering if she was gone. She whispered to the wind, "Still here, boys. Keep the coffee hot." The mountains answered only with the sigh of distant thunder. Ava smiled faintly, wiped rain from her face, and started walking again. Every step hurt, every breath scraped raw, but she moved with purpose. Behind her, stories were already forming of a woman who'd fallen from the sky and refused to die. And ahead, beyond the next ridge, destiny waited, either salvation or one last fight to prove that Rangers don't just survive. They redefine survival. The mountains had changed their song. Where before there had been silence and wind, now there was movement, men shouting, engines growling, the hum of a search widening like a storm. Ava Landon could feel it. Every time she pressed her ear to the earth, the vibration of tires and boots trembled faintly through the rock. They were hunting her. 3 days had passed since she'd raided the relay camp. The insurgents had found the bodies and the broken antenna, and the chase began. For every mile she put between them, they seemed to close half of it by nightfall. It wasn't just pursuit anymore. It was obsession. They wanted the shadow woman, caught, dead, or alive. Ava's body had reached its edge. Her ankle was swollen. Her ribs ached from the fall, and every muscle burned with the dull throb of fatigue. But pain was a familiar companion now. She treated it like an old teammate acknowledged it, then ignored it. By noon, she reached the spine of the ridge that split 2 valleys. From there she could see far, to the west, endless folds of gray stone fading into haze. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay friendly ground. Between them, however, were villages, patrols, and the unknown. She adjusted her pack, squinted at the sun, and kept moving. The ridge was treacherous, jagged, narrow, littered with loose rock. Below, the drop fell hundreds of feet into a chasm where fog clung like breath. One wrong step would end everything. But the higher she climbed, the more she could see, and seeing was surviving. Late that afternoon, she heard the unmistakable whine of a drone. She ducked beneath a rock outcrop as the small machine buzzed past, scanning the terrain. Her pulse steadied. They were using technology now. That meant command resources. Whoever was chasing her wasn't just local militia anymore. She waited for the sound to fade, then descended into a ravine where shadows swallowed her completely. There she found a narrow cave, barely wider than her shoulders. It wasn't shelter, it was a hiding place, the kind predators use before striking. She crawled inside, unrolled her thermal blanket to block infrared, and rested for the first time in 12 hours. Sleep came not as peace, but as necessity. She dreamed of her squad again, voices calling through static, the Admiral's smirk when he gave her the nickname Reaper Zero. It had been a joke then, a way to needle the only female operator in the unit. Now it was legend in the making. When she woke, the world was black except for starlight filtering through the cave mouth. Somewhere distant, gunfire echoed faintly, short bursts, then silence. She couldn't tell if it was for her or someone else. Either way, she moved. Traveling by night became instinct. She moved silently through the dark, guided by the faint outline of peaks against the sky. The moon painted silver paths across the stone, and Ava followed them like roads written by ghosts. At dawn she found a wrecked military truck half buried in sand, a relic from some forgotten convoy ambush. Inside, she scavenged a few usable parts, a first aid kit, a cracked scope, and an old radio battery. It wasn't much, but it meant options. She used the battery to power her earpiece briefly, scanning frequencies again. Static. Then, Bravo 1, confirm coordinates. Negative contact with Ranger. The signal was faint, but it was American. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed the receiver closer. "This is Sergeant Landon," she whispered. "Bravo 1, do you copy?" "I repeat, this is—" Static swallowed the rest. The battery flickered and died. She sat in silence, shaking with frustration and relief all at once. They were looking for her. The mission wasn't forgotten. If she could reach higher ground and boost her signal, maybe, just maybe, she could reach them before the enemy did. By afternoon, she began climbing again, heading toward a mountain that loomed like a spearhead. The terrain turned cruel loose shale, sudden cliffs, sharp wind that cut like glass. Twice she slipped, once nearly tumbling off the slope. But she kept going. The thought of that voice, the faint, real sound of home, pulled her like gravity. Hours later, as she neared the summit, she spotted movement below. Figures, maybe 6 of them, spread in a line, sweeping the valley floor. Through her scope, she saw uniforms, mismatched but coordinated mercenaries, likely trained, likely paid well. They carried long-range radios and night vision gear. This wasn't a local search party. Someone powerful wanted her silenced. Ava's mind clicked into tactical mode. She had one advantage: height. She used it. Setting her rifle across a rock ledge, she exhaled slowly, letting instinct replace thought. The first shot cracked through the thin air clean, controlled. The lead man dropped. The others scattered for cover, shouting. She fired twice more, then moved instantly, knowing they'd triangulate her position. Minutes later, mortar fire answered. The first explosion rocked the slope below, throwing debris skyward. Ava ducked and rolled down a secondary path, dust filling her lungs. She crawled behind a stone outcrop as another blast thundered above. The ridge shuddered. Chunks of rock tumbled past, one clipping her shoulder. Pain flared, but she bit it down. Survival first. Pain later. When the barrage stopped, she was alone again, alive, but barely. Her ears rang. Smoke drifted across the ridge like fog. She wiped blood from her cheek, pushed herself upright, and started west. The mercenaries wouldn't risk climbing after her now. They'd assume she was buried. Let them believe the ghost had finally vanished. She descended the far side of the mountain as twilight bled across the sky. In the valley below, faint lights flickered, a cluster of old radio towers, maybe abandoned, maybe not. Hope sparked again. If she could repair one, she could transmit a long-range signal strong enough for command to lock onto. Reaching the towers took hours. By the time she arrived, her legs trembled from exhaustion. The site was deserted, half-collapsed, metal skeletons groaning in the wind. She found a control shack still standing, its walls riddled with bullet holes. Inside, dust coated everything, but the console looked intact. She connected the salvaged battery and twisted wires with trembling fingers. A flicker of power surged through the board. Lights blinked weakly to life. She adjusted dials, praying. The speaker hissed, then cleared. "Command, this is Echo Base. Extraction grid confirmed. Reaper Zero presumed KIA." Her throat tightened. "Not yet," she said aloud, pressing the transmit key. "This is Reaper Zero. I'm alive. I repeat, alive and operational. Grid coordinates incoming." Static flared, and a voice cut in sharp, disbelieving. "Say again? Reaper Zero, is that you?" "Affirmative," she said. "North Ridge, 6 clicks east of Sector Delta. Hostiles active. Request immediate extraction." "Copy that. Hold position. Air support inbound. ETA 40 minutes. Ava exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Relief washed through her bones like heat. She slumped against the wall, laughing softly, almost deliriously. 40 minutes, she murmured. I can make 40 minutes. But fate wasn't finished testing her. The first sound came faintly, boots crunching gravel outside. Then voices. Not friendly ones. The mercenaries had tracked her after all, guided by the signal flare she'd just sent. She cursed under her breath, grabbed her rifle, and took position by the window. Shapes moved through the darkness, 5, maybe more. Come on then, she whispered, steadying her breath. You want the ghost? Come meet her. Gunfire erupted, glass shattering, sparks flying from the console. Ava returned fire in controlled bursts, shifting position with each shot. She wasn't fighting to win, she was fighting to hold. Every minute counted until the sky answered her call. Minutes bled into eternity. The console smoked, bullets chewed through metal, and Ava's magazine ran dry. She switched to her sidearm, breath ragged. Then, at last, a roar split the air, the distant thunder of helicopter blades. Flares streaked across the night sky. The mercenaries hesitated, then scattered. Ava used the moment to crawl toward the clearing, waving a signal flare. The chopper's searchlight locked onto her. Wind hammered her face as a voice blared from above. Reaper Zero, visual confirmed. She laughed again, hoarse but alive. The extraction rope dropped, swaying. As she clipped her harness and rose into the storm of dust, she looked down one last time at the ridge where she'd lived, bled, and nearly died. Below, the mountains swallowed the last echoes of battle. Above, the sky opened like a promise. Reaper Zero was going home. The rotors slowed, and silence crept over the landing pad like a ghost returning to its grave. Sergeant Ava Landon didn't move for a moment. Her boots were still caked in Afghan dust, her uniform shredded, her skin a roadmap of cuts and bruises. The medics waited with stretchers, but she shook them off. I can walk, she said, voice raw from days of smoke and sand. The pilot who'd brought her in, a young lieutenant, who hadn't spoken the entire flight, just stared. Ma'am, he said finally, they said you fell out of a helicopter. Ava adjusted the strap of her rifle. Guess they forgot to mention I bounce. The line of soldiers who had gathered on the tarmac parted as she passed. Some whispered, some stared in disbelief. No one said her name out loud, but everyone knew who she was. The one who fell. The one who came back. Inside the command tent, the light was too clean, too artificial. After days in the wilderness, it felt foreign. Officers looked up as she entered, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Colonel Haas, her commanding officer, stood behind the operations table, map spread wide beneath his hands. His expression was somewhere between anger and relief. "Sergeant Landon," he said, voice steady but taut. "You're supposed to be dead." "Permission to correct that, sir," she replied. The room went still, then a few quiet chuckles broke the tension. Hayes stepped forward, studying her like a puzzle that shouldn't exist. "We'll debrief later. Right now, the Admiral wants to see you." The Admiral. Rear Admiral Charles Masson, commander of Joint Special Operations Command. The man who'd personally greenlit the mission and who'd made the joke about her call sign during the pre-brief. Reaper Zero, because she'd never get to one. It had been humor for the room, a jab at the only woman in the insertion team. Now that same joke carried a different weight. When Ava entered the Admiral's office, he was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the desert sun burned against the glass. He didn't turn right away. "Close the door, Sergeant." She did. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Mason spoke, voice calm but sharp. "You were missing for 6 days. No comms, no signal, no confirmation of life. We conducted 2 search operations and found nothing but a shredded parachute harness and a blood trail. You were declared KIA." "Yes, sir." He turned now, eyes narrowing as he studied her. "And yet you're standing in front of me. You want to explain how?" Ava didn't flinch. Fell from 2,000 feet when the helo took fire. Landed on a rock slope, dislocated shoulder, minor fractures. Evaded capture. Found enemy outpost, secured comms, made contact. Extraction followed 40 minutes later. "That's not an explanation," Mason said quietly. "That's a miracle." She met his gaze. "With respect, sir, miracles are for people who wait to be saved. Rangers don't." A flicker of something respect, maybe even guilt, crossed his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." She remained standing. He sighed. "You disobeyed direct survival protocol by engaging the enemy while isolated. You compromised your cover by activating a damage signal relay. You fought mercenaries who outnumbered you 6-1 and used an enemy frequency to contact command. And yet, somehow, you're alive." "Yes, sir." He leaned closer. "So I'll ask again, Sergeant Landon. How?" The question hung in the air. Ava looked past him, at the horizon outside the line where sand met sky. Her voice was quiet when she finally answered. "Because when you fall, sir, you either stay down, or you learn how to land on your feet." The Admiral studied her for a long moment. Then he sat back, a ghost of a smile, tugging at the corner of his mouth. "They're already calling you. The ghost of the ridge. You know that?" Ava didn't answer. He stood, walking to his desk. "You'll be debriefed by Intel in the morning. After that, I want a full written report. Medical will clear you for observation, but if it were up to me, you'd be on the next flight home." "Permission to decline, sir." He raised an eyebrow. "Decline?" "With respect, Admiral, I didn't survive to go home. I survived to finish what we started. My team's still out there." Mason exhaled slowly, as though deciding whether to reprimand her or salute her. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" She allowed herself the faintest smirk. "No, sir. That's why I'm still breathing." He shook his head, half amused, half incredulous. "Dismissed, Sergeant. And Landon." She turned at the door. "Next time you decide to fall out of one of my helicopters, bring a parachute." The room rippled with muffled laughter from the officers who had overheard, but there was no mockery this time. Only respect. Ava saluted sharply. "Next time, sir, I'll try to aim for softer ground." Outside, the air felt different, cooler. The base hummed with quiet energy, the kind that follows a legend reborn. Soldiers she didn't know nodded as she passed. A few whispered Reaper Zero under their breath, not as a joke anymore, but as something like reverence. She stopped by the med tent long enough to let the corpsman tape her ribs and clean the cuts along her hands. He asked what had happened out there. She just said, "I fell, and I got back up." That night, she sat alone on a crate near the edge of the runway, watching the horizon fade to black. The helicopters rested in their bays, hulking shadows under floodlights. She could still hear the echoes of rotor blades in her mind, the wind against her face, the endless fall, and the certainty that she wouldn't survive it. She took a slow breath, letting it out through her teeth. She wasn't supposed to be here. Every inch of her body reminded her of that. And yet she was. Maybe that was what survival really was. Not the absence of fear or pain, but the refusal to surrender to it. A figure approached quietly from behind. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Colonel Hayes, you made the Admiral nervous today," he said, sitting beside her. "Did I?" "He doesn't like things he can't explain. And you, Landon, you're currently top of that list." She gave a small shrug. "I didn't plan to be." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, they're sending your name up for citation. Silver Star at minimum. Maybe more." Ava's gaze stayed on the horizon. "I didn't do it for a medal. I know." Hayes leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But you did something most people wouldn't believe possible. And you did it alone." She looked down at her scarred hands, flexing them slowly. "No one makes it alone, sir. Even when you think you're by yourself, you're still carrying everyone who taught you how to keep fighting." Hayes nodded, watching her for a long moment. Then he stood, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Get some rest, Reaper Zero. Tomorrow we'll see what comes next." When he left, the night settled around her again. The desert wind whispered across the sand, carrying faint echoes from far-away sounds of the ridge, the crack of rifles, the pulse of survival. Ava tilted her head back, staring up at the stars. Somewhere among them, perhaps, were the spirits of those who hadn't made it back. Maybe they were watching. Maybe they were laughing at the idea that she had fallen and lived. She smiled faintly. "Guess I wasn't done yet." The stars said nothing, but they shone brighter, as if in silent agreement. Far across the base, the Admiral stood by his window again, watching the same sky. The question he'd asked her still lingered in his mind. How did she survive? There was no tactical answer. No science, no formula. There was only one truth. Some soldiers hit the ground and vanish. Others hit the ground and rise again, carrying the impossible with them. And Sergeant Ava Landon had done both. The legend of Reaper Zero was no longer a story told in briefings or jokes. It was a reminder whispered through the ranks. Even when the world throws you out of the sky, Rangers land on their feet. The base woke before dawn. Engines rumbled, radios hissed, boots thudded on gravel. The air smelled of oil, dust, and rain that would never come. Sergeant Ava Landon had slept for 2 hours no more. The medics had insisted on observation, but she'd slipped out before sunrise, her ribs taped tight, her shoulders stiff beneath fresh bandages. Rest was for safety. Safety was for the dead. The mission map was still pinned to the operations board when she entered the tent. Red markers dotted the valleys where her Teen Ranger Unit Bravo 7 had last transmitted. The feed was 2 days old. No new signals since then. "Still dark," Hayes muttered when he saw her. "They're not dark," Ava said. "They're waiting." Hayes frowned. "You're not cleared for duty." "Then clear me," she said. "I'm the only one who knows that ridge. The only one who's seen what's up there." Before Hayes could answer, the tent flap opened. Admiral Mason stepped in, his uniform pressed and spotless, a fresh cup of coffee steaming in his hand. He looked from Hayes to Ava, expression unreadable. "I thought I grounded you, Sergeant." "You did," she said, straightening. But the ground didn't hold. Mason studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to laugh or arrest her. "You've got nerve, Landon." "I'll give you that." "She's right, sir," Hayes interjected. "We lost contact with Bravo 7 48 hours ago. Intel shows heavy movement in Sector Delta. We think the same group that hunted Landon has them pinned. She knows the terrain better than anyone alive." The Admiral's jaw tightened. The mission was scrubbed after her fall. The objective's been compromised. Ava stepped forward. "With respect, sir, you can cancel the mission, but you can't cancel the people still out there." For a long moment, Mason said nothing. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the power generator outside. Finally, he exhaled. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No, sir." He nodded slowly, resigned. "You've got 6 hours. One bird, limited fuel. Bring your people back." Ava's salute was sharp. "Yes, sir." The chopper lifted at 0600, slicing through the dawn. The pilot's sane lieutenant who'd flown her home kept glancing back through the cockpit glass as if to make sure she was real. Ava sat strapped beside a small rescue team. 2 medics, a comm specialist, and a gunner. None spoke. The rotors did all the talking. She checked her rifle, adjusted her scope, and stared at the mountains ahead. The same mountains that had nearly killed her. This time she wasn't falling into them. She was diving back in by choice. They reached the drop zone in under 20 minutes. Smoke curled faintly from the ridge below black against the pale light. The pilot's voice came over comms. "Visual on debris. That's not from us. Set down in the dry basin," Ava ordered. "I'll go in first." The pilot hesitated. "You sure about this?" She met his eyes through the visor. "I was sure last time, Lieutenant." "Didn't stop me then." He didn't argue. The chopper banked hard and hovered. Ava jumped. The ground met her like an old rival, rough but familiar. She rolled, came up crouched, rifle ready. The wind howled across the slope, carrying the smell of burned fuel and iron. No movement. She advanced, every step measured. Half a kilometer up the ridge, she found the remains of a small firefight. Empty shell casings, blood darkened by dust, tracks leading west. She followed. Her instincts, sharpened by the days she'd spent surviving here, guided her through the maze of rocks and gullies. After an hour, she found them. 3 rangers huddled in a narrow ravine, one wounded, the others exhausted, their uniforms ragged. When they saw her, disbelief flared in their eyes. The youngest, Private Carter, blinked hard. "Ma'am." "They said you were dead." Ava grinned faintly. "They keep saying that. I keep disappointing them." The teen sergeant, Morales, stepped forward, rifle still in hand. "We lost comms 2 days ago. The enemy's got drones in the valley. We've been boxed in since dawn." "Not anymore," Ava said. "Extraction birds on standby. We need high ground for the pickup." Morales nodded. "You know a route?" "I am the route," she said, and started climbing. They moved fast, but the enemy was faster. By midday, the first sniper round cracked past Ava's shoulder, slamming into a rock. Contact left. Morales shouted. They dove for cover as bullets sparked across the slope. Ava returned fire, her shots clean, efficient. The mercenaries fanned out, using smoke for cover. 3-man cell, advancing, Carter yelled. 2, Ava corrected, squeezing off a shot. 1 figure dropped. Now it's 2. Morales grinned despite the chaos. "Remind me never to bet against you, ma'am." "Good rule," she said, reloading. The firefight stretched for minutes that felt like hours. The team fought uphill, using the terrain like a shield. When at last the shooting died down, Keva signaled silence. She could feel the rhythm of the valley again, the way sound bounced, the way air moved. Something was coming. And then she heard it, the heavy thud of rotor blades. Not theirs. Enemy transport. "Move!" she shouted. "They're flanking from above." The team sprinted, ducking behind jagged outcrops as the helicopter's gunner opened fire. Dirt exploded around them. Ava dragged the wounded ranger across the rocks, bullets tearing through the air. The chopper looped back for another pass. Carter smoke. She yelled. The private popped a red canister, tossing it downhill. Thick clouds billowed, obscuring their movement. Ava used the cover to climb to a higher ledge. She set her rifle, took aim at the gunner's silhouette, and fired 3 precise rounds. The chopper veered off, smoking, spinning toward the far ridge. It hit the slope in a burst of flame that rolled like thunder through the valley. Silence followed. Only the wind remained. Ava exhaled, lowering her weapon. Morales looked up at her, eyes wide. "You just took down a bird with a rifle." She shrugged. "Guess I didn't need a parachute for that one either." They reached the extraction point by late afternoon, an open plateau, the same one Ava had nearly died beneath days before. She keyed her comms. "Echo Base, this is Reaper 0. Package secured. Need immediate pickup." Static crackled. Then Mason's voice came through. "Copy, Reaper 0. Bird inbound. Ada 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Too long in open ground." Ava scanned the horizon. "Set perimeter," she ordered. Eyes on all angles. The team formed a defensive circle. The wounded ranger lay near the center, breathing shallow. Ava knelt beside him, checking the bandage. "Stay with me," she said quietly. "You're going home." He managed a faint smile. "Heard you were unkillable, ma'am." She smirked. "Rumors make good armor." A sound of rotors grew louder. The extraction bird appeared over the ridge, glinting gold in the sunset. Relief surged, but only for a moment. Because behind the chopper, rising from the valley floor, came another enemy colors, armed and closing fast. "Contact rear flank." Morales shouted. Ava's jaw clenched. Not this time. She sprinted to the edge of the plateau, grabbed the signal flare, and fired it high. The streak of red cut across the sky like a battle cry. The friendly chopper saw it, dipped lower. Gunfire erupted between the 2 aircraft, tracer rounds slicing the twilight. "Go!" Ava shouted, helping her team toward the rope as the rescue bird hovered. Morales lifted the wounded man first, then Carter. Ava covered them, firing short bursts to suppress the enemy's advance. When the last man was aboard, the pilot called, "Reaper 0, now." Ava turned to run, but a flash of light caught her eye. A missile rising fast. She didn't think. She ran straight for the edge, dove, and hit the ground as the explosion ripped the plateau apart. The blast wave threw her back, ringing her ears. Through the smoke, she saw the friendly bird struggling but holding altitude. It circled, rope still hanging. Ava grabbed it with both hands and climbed, muscles screaming. Below, the ridge burned like a furnace. When she reached the bay, Morales pulled her in. The crew cheered, exhausted, half laughing, half crying. The pilot looked back, voice cracking over comms. "Everyone's up. We got him." Ava leaned against the wall, catching her breath. The valley shrank beneath them. Her eyes closed briefly. The sound of wind, rotors, and survival blended into one. Then the Admiral's voice came through the radio again. "Reaper 0. Mission accomplished." She smiled faintly. Copy that, Admiral? Outside, the last light of day faded behind the mountains, the same mountains that had once tried to bury her. Now they watched her leave. The legend of Reaper Zero had begun with a fall. But this was how it rose. 3 days after the extraction, the base was quiet again. The hum of generators had become background noise, the sound of a place trying to pretend everything was normal. But nothing felt normal to Sergeant Ava Landon. Not the bandage around her shoulder, not the new medals on her cot, and definitely not the silence from command. They had rescued the entire Ranger unit, every life saved, every enemy gun silenced, and yet something in the air felt wrong. Victory had never felt so hollow. She stood outside the debrief tent, watching the sun rise through a veil of dust. Inside, Admiral Mason was waiting. She took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and stepped in. The Admiral was alone, seated at the long metal table, a tablet glowing before him. "Sergeant Landon," he said without looking up, "you disobeyed medical orders, commandeered a chopper, and led an unauthorized rescue mission through enemy territory." Ava stood tall. "Yes, sir." He lifted his eyes. "And you brought every one of my soldiers back alive." She didn't reply. Mason leaned back, studying her. "You understand how that puts me in a difficult position?" Ava smirked faintly. "I'll try to live with it." He almost smiled, almost. Then he tapped the tablet and spun it toward her. The screen showed a series of satellite images. The valley where she had fought, the enemy camps, and most shocking, an American supply convoy heading directly toward one of those camps. She frowned. "Those trucks. They're ours." "Correct," Mason said. "And they weren't stolen. They were authorized." Ava's heart dropped. "Authorized by who?" Mason's jaw tightened. "That's what I intend to find out. But I need your help, Reaper Zero." The name hit her like an echo. "Reaper Zero?" He nodded. "That's what the surviving units are calling you. A ghost with a rifle who doesn't die. I figure it fits." She didn't smile. The name felt heavy, less like glory, more like warning. Mason leaned forward. "I've been in this game long enough to know when an op smells rotten. Those convoys shouldn't have been anywhere near your zone. Someone high up authorized them, someone with enough clearance to bury the paper trail. I can't run an internal probe without tipping them off. But you're off-grid. You can move unseen." "You want me to spy on our own people," Ava said slowly. "I want you to find the truth," Mason replied. "Because if what I suspect is true, your ambush wasn't an accident. You were meant to die out there." The words hit harder than a bullet. Ava stared at him, pulse pounding. "You think command set me up?" Mason didn't answer. He didn't have to. 2 nights later, Ava was gone. Officially, she was on leave. Unofficially, she was deep inside the capital, Washington. She moving like a shadow through the places where wars weren't fought with guns, but with data and signatures. She met her first contact in a parking garage 3 levels beneath an abandoned hotel. It was a man named Cole Everett, former cyber analyst turned whistleblower. He'd been part of a logistics division before vanishing off the grid. He handed her a flash drive wrapped in foil. "You didn't get this from me," he said. "What's on it?" "Proof. Supply chains rerouted, payments disguised as humanitarian aid, cargo manifests labeled as medical shipments. But when you dig deeper, you'll find the destination tags all trace back to the same contractor, Raven Dynamics." Ava froze. Raven Dynamics was a defense company tied to several covert programs. They'd been under quiet scrutiny for years, accused of selling tech to both sides of conflicts. Why would they target a Ranger unit? She asked. Cole hesitated. "Because you found something you weren't supposed to. That rescue op in the valley?" The ridge you stumbled on was one of their off-book test sites. They were moving weapons under the radar, training foreign mercs. When your patrol got too close, they used the chaos to clean up. She felt the cold rush through her chest. And command covered it? Not all of command, he said softly. Just the ones cashing the checks. Before she could respond, tires screeched above them. Headlights cut through the concrete darkness. Cole's eyes widened. You were followed. Gunfire erupted. Ava reacted instantly, grabbing Cole and pulling him behind a pillar as bullets tore through the air. Shadows moved fast black uniforms, no insignia. Not police. Not military. Private security Raven's cleanup crew. She fired back, her shots echoing across the garage. Sparks flew from the concrete as she advanced low, precise, her movements a deadly rhythm. 2 men went down. Another fled behind a van. She caught him with a shot to the knee and another to the weapon. Who sent you? She demanded, pressing the barrel to his chest. He spat blood. You should have stayed dead, Reaper. Before she could respond, he reached for a detonator. Ava dove back, dragging Cole with her as the van exploded, throwing fire across the garage. They hit the floor hard, ears ringing, the world turning red and gray. When she opened her eyes again, Cole was gone, his body buried under rubble, the flash drive clenched in his lifeless hand. That night, Ava stood on a bridge overlooking the Potomac. The city lights shimmered below like 1,000 lies. The flash drive was in her pocket. She wanted to throw it into the river, pretend none of it existed. But she couldn't. She had survived too much to start running now. Mason's words replayed in her head. You were meant to die out there. She opened the drive on a burner laptop inside a cheap motel. The files were encrypted, but she'd learned enough from her time with Intel to break through the first layer. What she found made her skin crawl. Lists of names, coordinates, transaction logs, and one folder labeled Operation Eclipse. Inside were drone footage clips, grayscale images of the same valley where her unit had been ambushed. Only this time, the timestamps showed the footage was recorded before her mission had even begun. Someone had been monitoring her team from the start. Then she saw the final file. A video feed, body cam angle, voice chatter overlay. It was hers. The moment she fell from the cliff, the signal had been hijacked, transmitted directly to a Raven Dynamics satellite. They hadn't just watched her die. They'd broadcast it. Ava slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard. The truth was clear now. Someone inside the U.S. defense system was using soldiers as pawns in a private war. And she had the evidence to prove it. But evidence alone wasn't enough. She needed a name. She called Mason on a secure line. Admiral, I found it. Operation Eclipse. Raven Dynamics is running an off-book program using U.S. assets. Someone in command's feeding them orders. Mason's voice came through steady, but low. I was afraid you'd say that. Landon, listen carefully. You need to disappear for a few days. I'll handle the next move. Disappear? She echoed. Sir, they already know where I am. A pause. Then Mason said quietly, Not they, Sergeant. He. Her blood ran cold. Who's he? But the line went dead. Ava stared at the phone, heart hammering. For the first time, she realized that even Mason, her last ally, might not be safe. Outside, the motel sign flickered in the wind. A car slowed across the street, headlights dimmed. She watched it for a moment before reaching for her rifle. If they wanted the Reaper, she thought, they were about to meet her face to face. Because this time, she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting to expose the truth. And the shadow war that had begun in the mountains was about to hit the heart of Washington. The city never slept, but Ava Landon barely noticed. Each step she took was measured, calculated, silent. She moved like a shadow through alleys and rooftops, her mind replaying the images from Operation Eclipse, satellite feeds, drone footage, and the grim reality of her team being used as test subjects for a private war. Her destination was clear. Raven Dynamics headquarters, a towering black monolith in the heart of the capital. Officially, it was a defense contractor, legitimate, untouchable. Unofficially, it was a fortress, bristling with armed guards, surveillance cameras, and a security team trained in every weapon known to man. Ava didn't flinch. She had fallen from 2,000 feet, survived sniper fire, ambushes, and betrayal. A building full of mercenaries was a challenge, not a threat. Inside, she moved quickly, disabling cameras with small EMP devices, slipping past guards with calculated timing. Each floor she cleared brought her closer to the executive suite, the office of the man responsible for Operation Eclipse, the one who had tried to erase her and her unit from existence. He was waiting. The moment she entered the office, the lights clicked on. A tall man in a tailored suit stood behind a desk, his expression calm, almost amused. "Reaper Zero," he said smoothly. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." Ava's rifle trained on him immediately. "You know why I'm here." He chuckled. "I know. You're brave. I'll give you that. But bravery doesn't matter when you're outnumbered and outgunned." "I'm not here to be brave," she said. "I'm here to make sure you don't hurt anyone else." The man's smile didn't waver. "You think you can stop what's already in motion? Operation Eclipse is bigger than me, bigger than you, bigger than anyone who wants to play by the rules." Ava's eyes narrowed. "Rules are for people who survive by them. I survive by breaking them." He raised his hands mockingly. "Then let's see what you've got." And just like that, the office erupted into chaos. Guards poured in from every angle, rifles raised, weapons gleaming under fluorescent lights. Ava dove behind the desk, firing first. Bullets kicked up shards of glass and twisted metal. She moved fast, rolling from cover to cover, hitting every shot with surgical precision. 2 guards down, she grabbed a fallen rifle and fired again. The suited man ducked behind his desk, muttering into a comlink. "Initiate lockdown," he barked. The building shook with alarms. Doors sealed, lights flickered, and cameras swiveled. Ava was trapped, but she didn't panic. Every moment she spent in this room had already been calculated. She vaulted onto a chair, kicked a console into the nearest guard, and slid across the polished floor. Smoke grenades from the ceiling obscured her movements. In the chaos, she moved like a ghost, disappearing, striking, reappearing. Each step brought her closer to the man behind the desk. Finally, they faced each other across the shattered remains of the office. His gun was drawn. Hers was steady. The room smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear. "You could have walked away," he said, voice low. "I don't walk away," Ava replied. Gunfire rang out again, ricocheting from the walls. She feigned left, then dove right, sliding across the floor and knocking his weapon away. The two struggled, fists and elbows meeting in the confined space. She was faster, stronger, fueled by every fall, every mission, every betrayal. With a final, brutal strike, she sent him sprawling against his desk. His gun skidded across the floor. Ava trained her rifle on him again, hands steady. "Do you understand what you've done?" she asked, her voice cold. He laughed, but it was brittle. "I did what was necessary for progress, for power. Necessary for death," she said. "For soldiers, for innocence." Before he could react, she forced him to the ground, cuffs snapping around his wrists. The echo of authority returned through the building as backup arrived. Admiral Mason and a team of military police had entered through a secondary access point. Mason stepped into the smoke-filled room, eyes scanning Ava and the captured executive. "Sergeant Landon," he said, voice calm, "you've done more than survive. You've ensured justice." Ava didn't reply. She simply exhaled, watching the man she had hunted helpless beneath her rifle. Justice at last had a face. The building was secured in under an hour. Files, encrypted drives, and evidence of Operation Eclipse were confiscated. Raven Dynamics executives were arrested, their empire of covert operations collapsing under the weight of Ava's courage. Later, in Mason's office, she finally allowed herself to breathe. "So, it's over?" she asked. "For now," Mason said, leaning back in his chair. "But you've made a statement today. One that everyone will remember. The government can't hide from the truth anymore." Ava nodded slowly. Her body ached, her shoulder throbbed, but for the first time in weeks, the weight pressing on her chest lifted. She was free, not just physically, but morally, emotionally, finally free. Mason studied her for a moment. "I have to ask, Reaper Zero, why did you survive everything?" She looked at him, letting a faint, grim smile touch her lips. "Because falling doesn't mean dying. It means finding a way to land on your feet. And I always land on my feet, sir." He shook his head in disbelief, almost a smile breaking through his stern facade. "Then you truly are a ghost." Ava didn't answer. She simply turned, walking out of the office, each step firm, echoing against the walls of a place that had tried to hide the truth. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the city in gold and fire. Helicopters hummed overhead, soldiers marched to unknown missions, and the wind carried the faint scent of freedom. She paused at the edge of the street, looking up at the sky. Somewhere out there, far away, her team rested, alive because she refused to stay down. Somewhere out there, the mountains still waited, the ridge still whispered, and the world still held danger, but she had survived it all. Reaper Zero had survived. And now, she was walking back into the light. The legend of Reaper Zero was complete. It began with a fall from a helicopter, a ridge that tried to swallow her, and missions that should have killed her. It ended with survival, justice, and the undeniable truth. Some soldiers don't just fight, they rise from impossible odds, become ghosts, and leave the world forever changed. No parachute, no backup, no second chances. Just Reaper Zero.